September 6, 1939. 5 days into the invasion of Poland, outside a town called Piotrków Trybunalski, a column of German panzers is pulling back. Not advancing, not regrouping for a flanking maneuver, retreating in the middle of what was supposed to be the easiest campaign the Wehrmacht would ever fight. The tanks that pushed them out weren't supposed to be capable of that. Some of them had already been written off years earlier by the very army evaluating whether to buy them. Romanian officers had looked at this tank in field trials back in 1935 and walked away unimpressed, recommending a Czechoslovak design instead. British engineers who'd sold Poland the original blueprint considered their own version obsolete before it ever left the factory floor. And now, in the first week of a war, everyone expected Germany to win in days. This tank was the reason a panzer division had to fall back and try again. The tank was called the 7th NTP, and almost nobody outside a small circle of military historians has ever heard of it. To understand why what happened at Piotrków mattered, you have to understand what the 7TP actually was, and, just as importantly, what everyone assumed it was. Poland didn't have the industrial base of Germany or France. It couldn't outproduce anyone. By 1939, the country had managed to build barely more than 130 of these tanks total, split across 2 battalions, alongside a scattering of lighter tankettes that made up the bulk of Polish armor. Compare that to the thousands of tanks Germany was fielding, and on paper this wasn't a contest. It was a formality. The 7TP itself started life as a British design, the Vickers 6-ton, a tank Britain had already moved past by the time Poland licensed it. That alone gave outside observers plenty of reason to dismiss it. A second-hand chassis built by a country with a fraction of Germany's manufacturing capacity, fielded in numbers you could count in the low hundreds. To German intelligence and to most military attachés watching from the sidelines, Poland's tank force looked like a footnote. Something to note in a report and then move past. What that assessment missed was what Polish engineers had done to the tank once they got their hands on it. They replaced the original gasoline engine with a diesel one. That decision seems small until you understand what it meant in combat. German tanks of the period ran on gasoline, and gasoline engines had a well-known problem. When a shell or an incendiary round found the engine compartment, they tended to go up in flames fast, often with the crew still inside. Diesel fuel is far less volatile. It doesn't ignite from a spark or a graze the way gasoline does. The 7TP was, as far as military historians can determine, the first tank in the world to enter combat with a diesel engine as standard. Polish tank crews didn't know exactly how much that would matter until they were on the receiving end of German fire and their engines simply didn't catch. Then there was the gun. Poland fitted the 7TP with a Swedish-designed 37mm Bofors anti-tank gun, and this is the detail that should have changed how everyone evaluated this tank, but somehow didn't circulate widely enough before the shooting started. That gun could punch through the armor of every single tank Germany brought into Poland in 1939. Not most of them, all of them, including the Panzer IV, Germany's newest and most heavily armored design at the time. A 7TP crew that got a clean shot on a German tank at almost any range that mattered in the terrain around Piotrków could kill it. And then there was the periscope. Polish engineers installed a design called the Gundlach periscope, offering the tank commander a full 360-degree view of the battlefield without exposing his head outside the hull. German tank commanders in 1939 still relied on far more limited vision systems, meaning a 7TP crew could frequently see a threat developing before their German counterparts even knew they'd been spotted. In tank combat, especially in the chaotic, close terrain around a Polish town in early September, seeing first was often the difference between shooting first and being destroyed. None of this showed up in the pre-war assessments. None of it made it into the confident predictions from Berlin or the dismissive field reports from foreign observers. On paper, this was still just Poland's outdated, undersized tank force, the sad footnote to a war everyone assumed would be over before autumn. Then came Piotrków. On September 5th, German armor pushed toward the town as part of the broader advance following the breakthrough at Borowa Góra. Polish artillery 155mm howitzers opened up first and knocked out several German tanks before they even reached the outskirts. The Germans fell back, regrouped, and came again. This time the 7 TPs of the Warsaw Armored Motorized Brigade were waiting. What followed wasn't a Polish tank corps sweeping the field. It was smaller than that, messier than that, and in some ways more remarkable because of it. A handful of 7TPs, outnumbered and unsupported by any real air cover, engaged the German column directly. 5 Panzers were destroyed. Then, after the Germans pressed a second attack and took several more direct hits, something happened that almost never happened to German armor in the opening days of the war. The crews abandoned the fight. Tank crews climbed out and ran. German infantry, following behind, tried to press the attack on foot and were driven back by Polish tanks holding the line. By the end of the day on September 6th, there wasn't a single German soldier left in Piotrków-Trybunalski. If you go looking for a detailed German account of exactly what happened inside those Panzer crews' heads in the moments before they abandoned their vehicles, you won't find one. The war diaries from that stretch of the campaign are thin, more concerned with the broader advance than with an isolated setback at a town that would be back under German control within days. What we're left with is the outcome, recorded from the Polish side and confirmed after the war by military historians, combing through what records survive. But the German internal reasoning for the retreat, the exact moment someone in that column decided the position was lost, has never been fully reconstructed. It's one of those gaps that opens up when the side that lost a small, embarrassing engagement has every institutional reason not to document it closely. Piotrków wasn't an isolated incident either. 12 days later, in the closing stages of the campaign, elements of the same brigade fought their way into the town of Tomaszów Lubelski during what became the second largest tank battle of the entire Polish campaign. Polish tanks broke through, destroying 6 German tanks, 4 armored cars, and 8 trucks in the process, liberating Polish prisoners and capturing dozens of German soldiers along the way. It was, by any measure, a stunning tactical success for a force that outside observers had already written off weeks earlier. It didn't save Poland. By this point in the campaign, the Luftwaffe had already secured total air superiority, meaning every Polish tank movement was visible and vulnerable to attack from above with nothing to answer it. The Soviet invasion from the east on September 17th sealed the outcome regardless of what was happening on any single battlefield. The brigade that fought at Tomaszów Lubelski was eventually surrounded, worn down over repeated night assaults, until only a single tank remained operational. It surrendered days later. 27 TPs were evacuated with their crews across the border into Romania. 20 more were captured intact by the Germans, who found the design useful enough to fold directly into their own forces, deploying captured 7 TPs in Norway, in France, and later against the Soviet Union. That last detail is worth sitting with. Germany didn't just fail to destroy this tank design, they adopted it. A machine built by a country with a fraction of their industrial capacity, dismissed before the war by the very people evaluating it, ended up serving in German uniform on 4 different fronts. So why isn't this common knowledge? Why does almost nobody outside a narrow circle of armor historians know the name 7TP, while the Sherman and the Tiger and the T-34 became household names decades ago? Part of the answer is simple. Poland lost the war, and history has a habit of remembering the tanks that were on the winning side in overwhelming numbers, not the ones that briefly outperformed expectations in a campaign that ended in defeat regardless. Part of it is that the numbers were so small, barely more than 100 tanks total, that it never became a mass-produced symbol the way German or American or Soviet armor did. But the technical record is there, sitting in post-war assessments, confirming that this tank, dismissed before it ever fired a shot, could kill anything Germany sent against it, could survive hits that would have incinerated a German crew, and could see threats coming before its opponents even knew they'd been spotted. The gap between what everyone assumed this tank was and what it actually did in combat is still, nearly 90 years later, wider than almost any other vehicle from that opening campaign of the war. Whether that gap gets remembered, or quietly buried under the weight of a 5-week defeat, seems to depend entirely on whether anyone's still willing to look.